My sister started charging me rent on the house I owned after my fiancé died, so I took her to court and exposed everything. 3 years later, she's writing me from rehab, asking if we can be family again. My fiancé Elias died chasing overtime to pay for our honeymoon. I was supposed to wear white, I wore black instead. The construction site that swallowed him whole spat out a check. Blood money they called life insurance. I couldn't touch it, couldn't breathe, couldn't stand. Enter Chloe, my sister, swooping in like a vulture dressed as a dove. "I've got you," she whispered, canceling florists with one hand while sorting funeral programs with the other. 18 months passed in a morphine drip of days. Then Roy appeared. "Met him downtown," Chloe announced, dragging home this unemployed contractor with a smile that never reached his eyes. 3 weeks later, he'd colonized our grandmother's house like black mold, spreading room by room, invisible until the damage was done. Chloe and I had inherited only a year before Elias's death, and ever since Elias and I had lived alone. Now Chloe and Roy seemed to be permanent. "We need to talk finances," Chloe said one morning, sliding papers across the breakfast table. "Since we both inherited, you should contribute. Just utilities at first." I was drowning. She threw me an anchor and called it a life reserver. $1,500 a month. That's what co-owners apparently pay each other through the shell company my sister created overnight. Only I didn't know that. So I signed where she pointed, worked double shifts to afford living in my own home, and pretended not to notice when Elias's tools vanished into Roy's truck. They took the master bedroom, our bedroom, where Elias and I had painted the walls sunrise yellow for new beginnings. "Roy has a bad back," Chloe explained, moving my things to the guest room. "You understand?" I didn't understand anything anymore. The house transformed. I became the ghost haunting my own life while they played happy family. "Our roommate," Chloe would say at parties, gesturing to me like furniture. I'd stand there, hollowed out, paying for the roof over their heads and the food in their mouths while they contributed nothing but gaslighting and theft. "Grandma's jewelry disappeared. Must have been stolen," Chloe said, tears perfectly timed. "We should change the locks." My childhood friend Maya tried to save me, saw the weight falling off my bones, the bruises under my eyes, but Chloe had weaponized my grief. "Hallie insists on paying more rent. It's survivor's guilt. Hallie gave us the bedroom. She can't sleep there anymore. Hallie's hostile to anyone trying to help." They documented everything. Photos of my depression, recordings of my breakdown on Elias's death anniversary, papers signed through exhausted tears. They were building a case, creating evidence, crafting my destruction. Then the bank called and said that Elias's safety deposit box needed renewal. I had no idea Elias had a safety deposit box. When I told Chloe, her face went corpse white at dinner. "You're obsessing," she hissed. "It's unhealthy." When I insisted on going anyway, she slapped an eviction notice on the table. 30 days. The papers I'd signed blindly were a lease. I was a tenant in my own home. Roy cracked his knuckles. "I'll call the cops myself if you don't go quietly." I fled to a motel that night. That's when I had the first clear thought in months. Elias had said something. Right before he died, he said, "I'm securing our future, Em." Despite their threats, I decided to go to the bank. The problem was that I needed Elias's keys, which were in my home. When I returned, the locks were changed. A restraining order decorated the door like a twisted welcome mat. I'd apparently threatened violence. News to me. But Chloe had the proof. Videos, texts taken out of context. Even Maya looked at me sideways now. I got a lawyer whose only advice was, "Eviction takes months. Keep paying rent, or you'll risk breaching the lease." Meanwhile, Chloe had listed the house for sale as sole owner. The safety deposit box took 2 lawyers to open. I had to provide proof that Elias had passed and had signed me as his beneficiary and heir. But everything was worth it when I saw Elias's final gift for me. The deed to my grandmother's house and a letter. He'd bought Chloe's half 6 months before he died. "Your sister's drowning in debt," his letter explained. "I'm protecting you. She doesn't own anything anymore. The check's been cashed. It's done." She knew. God, she knew. Every month she'd collected rent on a house she didn't own. Every lie about helping me was calculated. Every tear perfectly placed. She'd been robbing me blind while I grieved myself hollow. My phone rang. Chloe's voice had shed its mask, threatening to have me committed. She listed the evidence they'd manufactured. Roy's connections at the state hospital. How they'd lock me away until I forgot Elias, forgot the house, forgot everything. "We've done our homework, Hallie. Who's going to believe the crazy grieving girl over her caring sister?" I hung up, looked at the deed that could destroy them. My hands didn't shake anymore. Grief had burned away everything soft, leaving only sharp edges and the ghost of Elias's protection. They'd stolen everything else. They wouldn't steal this. The war for my life had just begun. I drove straight to the 24-hour FedEx, my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in months. The deed burned in my purse like a live coal. I needed copies, backups, evidence that couldn't disappear if they got their hands on the original. The fluorescent lights made everything look sick and yellow. I fed the deed into the machine, watching it scan line by line. 20 copies. I'd hide them everywhere. My lawyer's office, a new safety deposit box, maybe even mail one to myself at work. While I stood there making copy after copy, I knew Chloe was home shredding papers. Maya had texted me earlier about seeing her through the window, feeding document after document into their new industrial shredder. Bank statements probably. Anything that showed the money trail. My phone buzzed. A reminder for my pharmacy pickup. I'd need my anxiety medication if I was going to survive this war. The copies finished printing, and I carefully organized them into separate envelopes. The grocery store pharmacy stayed open until midnight. I parked and walked through the sliding doors, past the wilted flowers and day-old donuts. The pharmacist recognized me. I'd been coming here since Elias died. I gave my name and date of birth, watching her type into the computer. Her face changed, confusion creeping across her features. Behind me, I heard a familiar cough. Not just any cough. Elias's nervous cough, the one he did when he was anxious. My blood froze. I turned slowly. Chloe stood in the next line, doing that cough again. She saw me looking and smiled. Then she stepped forward to the other pharmacy tech. "I'm here to pick up my prescription," she said clearly. "Hallie Morrison, Hallie." The pharmacy tech started typing. I opened my mouth to object, but Chloe turned to me with that same sweet smile she'd perfected over months of manipulation. "Oh, hi sis. Picking up your meds too? I'm getting mine. Well, yours actually. You asked me to grab them, remember? This morning when you were having that episode?" The pharmacist looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. Other customers started paying attention. I kept my voice level. "I didn't ask you to pick up anything. Those are my prescriptions." Chloe's face transformed into concern. She did that cough again, Elias's cough, and touched her chest. "Oh, honey, you're confused again. Remember? Like when you forgot about signing the lease?" She turned to the growing audience. "My sister's been having such a hard time since her fiancé died. Sometimes she forgets things." I stepped forward. forward, pulling out my ID. I'm Hallie Morrison. She's lying. Check her ID. But Chloe was already backing away, hands up in mock surrender. I don't want to upset you. I'll go. Please take your medication, Hallie. You need it. She left, but the damage was done. The pharmacist looked at me with that expression I'd grown to hate. Part pity, part fear. She handed me my medication slowly, like I might explode. I grabbed the bag and headed for the parking lot. Chloe was waiting by my car, leaning against the driver's door. No witnesses out here, just the two of us under the harsh parking lot lights. Get away from my car. She didn't move. I know about the deed, Hallie. Roy has friends at the bank. They called us right after you left. I stopped 10 feet away, keys clutched between my fingers. Then you know you've been stealing from me every month while I grieved. Stealing? Her voice went loud, theatrical. A couple pushing a cart looked over. You're saying I'm stealing now? After everything I've done for you? She raised her voice more. Hallie, you're having another episode. Just like after Dad died, the couple stopped completely. The woman pulled out her phone. I recognized the look. She was recording. Stop it, I said quietly. Stop lying. I'm not the one who's lying. Chloe was almost screaming now. You threatened me. You said you'd burn the house down. That's why we had to get the restraining order. She clutched her chest, hyperventilating. Please, someone help. She's not well. More people gathered. Someone asked if they should call 911. I stood there, trapped, knowing anything I said would make it worse. Chloe had perfected this performance. I turned and walked to my car, going the long way around. Chloe moved aside, still playing the terrified sister. As I drove away, I saw her in my rearview mirror, being comforted by strangers who thought they'd witnessed a dangerous confrontation. My phone rang. My lawyer's office. The paralegal sounded strange, hesitant. Ms. Morrison, I'm sorry to call so late, but we need to discuss something. It's about your sister. My stomach dropped. What about her? She's been listed as a reference for an apartment. For my daughter. She's starting college and, well, your sister is the landlord for one of the properties we're looking at. I didn't realize the connection until today. The paralegal, Catherine, had been helping build my case. She knew everything. And now her daughter needed something from Chloe. I understand, I said, though my throat felt tight. You have to do what's best for your daughter. I'm not abandoning your case, Catherine said quickly, but I might need to step back from some aspects to avoid any conflicts. Another ally, compromised. Chloe was playing chess while I was still learning the rules. The next morning, I faced an impossible choice. My lawyer had scheduled an emergency meeting about filing an immediate injunction, but Maya had texted me a photo. Chloe in the garage with boxes, pulling out what looked like Elias's work notebooks, the ones where he kept all his project notes, his plans, maybe even evidence about the house purchase. I couldn't be in two places at once. The lawyer appointment would establish legal precedent, but those notebooks might contain irreplaceable evidence. I sat in my motel room, paralyzed by the decision. I chose the lawyer. It felt like betrayal, leaving Elias's notebooks to Chloe's mercy, but I needed legal protection more than sentimental items, or so I told myself. The meeting took 3 hours. We filed for an emergency hearing to challenge the eviction, documented the deed, and started building a fraud case. By the time I left, the sun was setting. Maya called as I drove back. You need to see this, she said. Chloe's having some kind of dinner party. She sent me photos from the neighborhood Facebook group, Grief Support Dinner. The post read, supporting each other through loss. Pictures showed Chloe serving lasagna to a dozen neighbors, Roy charming everyone with construction stories, my absence noted in the comments as Hallie's too fragile to join us yet. They were establishing themselves as the stable, caring couple while painting me as the broken sister who couldn't cope. Every neighbor who attended became a potential witness to their version of reality. My car started making a grinding noise near the motel. Then my phone died. Not just the battery, but completely black. The motel manager knocked on my door, wanting payment for another week. 3 crises at once, and only one involved Chloe directly, but they all demanded immediate attention. I dealt with the motel first, using half my remaining cash to buy another week. The car would have to wait. I walked to the gas station to buy a cheap phone charger, hoping to resurrect my lifeline to the outside world. The ATM at the gas station took my card, and I withdrew my daily limit. I needed every penny for the legal fight ahead. As I counted the bills, I helped a young mother whose car wouldn't start, giving her jumper cables from my trunk. It felt good to help someone, to be useful instead of helpless. I didn't notice the man at the gas pump taking photos of me. Didn't see him texting rapidly. Roy's friend from his construction days, though I wouldn't learn that until later. 2 days later, Chloe tried to access the house's equity line of credit. I heard about it from a teller at the bank who remembered Elias. She called me, whispering that my sister had broken down completely when they'd denied her access. She had a panic attack right there in the lobby, the teller said. We had to call paramedics. She kept saying she needed the money for her sick sister's treatment. Even her genuine distress became a weapon, earning sympathy from everyone who witnessed it. The bank staff would remember the desperate woman trying to help her troubled sister, not the thief trying to steal from a house she didn't own. My goddaughter's birthday party was that weekend. I'd missed it, of course. The restraining order made attendance impossible. But Jonathan, my best friend's husband, brought their daughter to visit me at the motel. Aunt Chloe gave me the best present, she announced, showing off a new tablet. She said you were too sick to come to my party, but she brought extra cake for you. She's been taking me to ice cream every week since you got sick. I forced a smile, hugging her tight. After they left, I sat in my motel room and cried. Chloe was stealing my family, one relationship at a time. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. I drove past the house, carefully, always from a legal distance, and saw Elias's work truck in the driveway. Not just any truck, but his personal one, the one he'd modified himself. Chloe had it. And there, visible through the back window, was a manila folder that made my heart stop. Even from the street, I could see Elias's handwriting on the tab, work contracts, including possibly the documentation about the house purchase. But I couldn't touch it. The restraining order made the truck as unreachable as the moon. I could see the evidence that might save me, but taking it would land me in jail. That night, desperation won. I needed my prescription refills, the ones Chloe had tried to steal. They were in the house, in the medicine cabinet I'd stocked just days before the eviction. Without them, I'd have to pay hundreds out of pocket, money I didn't have. I waited until 3 a.m. The house was dark. I knew which window didn't lock properly. The bathroom window Elias had meant to fix. I slipped through like a shadow, muscle memory guiding me through my own home. The medicine cabinet was empty, of course, but I found my prescriptions in Chloe's room, along with papers I didn't have time to read. I grabbed only what was mine and started back to the window. The flash was blinding. Motion-activated camera, new since my eviction. Then another flash. The Ring doorbell Chloe had installed, capturing me climbing out the window of my own home. By morning, the photos were everywhere. The concerned neighbors' Facebook group, the police Police report. My lawyer's email, forwarded from Chloe's attorney. Clear images of me breaking into the house, looking exactly like the dangerous, unstable person Chloe had been describing. The hospital called that afternoon. The patient advocate who'd helped me after Elias died, who'd held my hand through the worst day of my life, had taken a new job. She now worked for the psychiatric practice where Chloe's therapist practiced. The same therapist who would be doing my court-ordered mental health evaluation. I wanted you to hear it from me, she said. I'll recuse myself from anything involving your case, but I thought you should know. Another chess piece moved. Another ally neutralized. Chloe and Roy were playing a long game, and I was only just beginning to understand the rules. Mom called that evening. Her voice was careful, worried. Honey, Chloe showed me the photos. The break-in. It's just like when your father died. Remember? You got confused then too. Forgot which house was yours. I wanted to scream that I'd been 17 when Dad died. That grief-stricken teenage confusion wasn't the same as this. But Chloe had planted the seed perfectly. Mom was remembering my worst moments, seeing patterns that weren't there. I'm not confused, Mom. The house is mine. Elias bought Chloe's half. Sweetheart, she sighed. Chloe showed me the lease, your signature, and the bank statements showing you paying rent. Why would you pay rent on your own house? Because I was drowning. Because I trusted my sister. Because grief had made me stupid. But those explanations sounded like excuses, even to me. The neighborhood Facebook group became a minefield. Someone posted condolences on the anniversary of Grandma's death. I responded with thanks, sharing a memory of her garden. Within hours, Chloe had screenshot my response, adding her own comment about how I was fixating on the past and unable to move forward in my grief. My simple thank you became evidence of instability. Every word I wrote got twisted, reframed, weaponized. I stopped responding, but silence was seen as antisocial behavior. I couldn't win. I started driving by the house at different times, always legally, always from the proper distance. But neighbors noticed. They started logging my drive-bys in a shared document, times and dates recorded like I was some kind of stalker. They sent it to Chloe with genuine concern for her safety. Then came the letter. Chloe produced it at her lawyer's office, claiming she'd found it in Elias's things, his handwriting apparently, saying he wanted his life insurance split between both sisters. He loved you both, her lawyer explained. He wanted to take care of family. The letter was perfect, too perfect. But proving forgery would take experts, money, time I didn't have. And there was one detail that made my blood run cold. The letter mentioned Elias's nervousness about the wedding, something he'd only told me. Chloe had been listening to our private conversations. I realized later that Elias's phone plan was still active, still auto-paying from his account, the account Chloe now controlled. She had access to his voicemails, his texts, maybe even his cloud storage. Sleep became impossible. 3 nights without rest made me sloppy. I ran a red light near the elementary school, not seeing it until too late. The crossing guard was there. Thank God no children. But she got a clear look at my face, at my exhausted, hollow eyes. By afternoon, the incident was on the Facebook group. Dangerous driving near school. Looked intoxicated. Putting our children at risk. Each comment another nail in the coffin Chloe was building around me. Nathan called that night. My best friend since childhood, married to Jonathan. She was crying. He says I have to choose, she sobbed. Either I stop enabling your delusions or he's filing for divorce. He thinks you're dangerous, that you'll drag me down with you. I have kids, Hallie. I can't lose them. I told her I understood. I did. But understanding didn't make it hurt less when she stopped answering my calls. The coffee shop had been my refuge, the one place in town where I could sit and think without feeling watched. But that changed too. Regulars started switching tables when I sat down. Conversations stopped when I entered. One brave soul, someone I'd known peripherally for years, finally showed me why. The Neighborhood Watch Facebook page, the one I wasn't allowed to join, had a whole thread about my concerning behavior. Photos of me at the pharmacy, security footage from the grocery store, that video from the parking lot confrontation. I thought you should see what they're saying, she whispered, then quickly left before anyone saw her talking to me. The thread was devastating. Neighbors analyzing my body language, my weight loss, my aggressive posture. Roy had added helpful context about my history of instability and their efforts to get me help. Then Chloe played her masterstroke. She claimed Elias had whispered something to her in the ICU when I'd stepped out to call his parents. His last words, she said, were about taking care of me, making sure I got help for my problems. It was brilliant. I hadn't been there. No one had. But the ICU nurse, touched by the story, had written it in her personal grief journal, the one she kept to process the hard cases. She'd written what Chloe told her, and now it was documented. Proof of Elias's final wishes. My coworker Victoria pulled me aside at work. She needed a favor. Her custody battle was heating up, and Chloe's connection at the county clerk's office could fast-track some paperwork. Could I understand if she needed to keep some distance, just temporarily? Everyone had a reason. Everyone had something to lose, and Chloe knew exactly which pressure points to push. I found the jewelry. Maya had bought a bracelet at the pawn shop and recognized Grandma's inscription. I had the receipt, the proof that Chloe had lied about it being stolen. But when I triumphantly presented this evidence to anyone who'd listen, I looked petty, vindictive. Who cares about jewelry when your sister is just trying to help you? The truth was starting to feel like a burden. Every piece of evidence I found made me look worse, obsessed, unable to let go, focused on material things instead of healing. The breaking point came at Target. I'd found a discrepancy in Chloe's story, proof that she'd lied about where she was when Elias's insurance check arrived. I laughed, actually laughed, standing there in the store, holding the receipt that proved her deception. The security camera caught it all. A disheveled woman laughing maniacally in the middle of Target, clutching a piece of paper. The footage made its way to Chloe's lawyer, evidence of my inappropriate emotional responses and deteriorating mental state. I sat in my motel room that night, surrounded by evidence that painted me as crazy as often as it painted Chloe as guilty. Every truth I uncovered came wrapped in optics that made me look unstable. The war wasn't about truth anymore. It was about perception, and Chloe was winning. I thought about Elias, about his careful planning, his attempt to protect me. He'd seen this coming, or something like it, but he'd died before he could finish building our defenses. Now I was alone, fighting a war on multiple fronts with dwindling resources and fewer allies each day. The restraining order kept me from my home. The manufactured evidence kept me from my family. The whisper campaign kept me from my community. But I still had the deed. The one thing Chloe couldn't fake or steal or twist. Elias's final gift, his protection from beyond the grave. I looked at the papers scattered across my motel bed. Medical records, bank statements, text messages, a paper trail of truth that looked like madness to anyone who didn't know the full story. Both sisters couldn't survive this. Chloe had made that clear from the beginning. She'd built a narrative where I was either lying or crazy, where helping me meant enabling delusion. I'd been playing defense, reacting to each new attack, trying to prove my sanity while she proved my instability. But that was a losing game. Every denial looked like paranoia. Every piece of evidence looked like obsession. The war for my life had taken a turn I never expected, and I was running out of moves. Roy showed up at my grief support group the following Tuesday. I recognized his swagger before he even sat down, that practiced ease he used to infiltrate spaces. He introduced himself as someone who'd lost his brother in construction, quoting Elias's favorite book about finding meaning through loss. The group welcomed him with open arms while my stomach churned. He knew things only Elias would know. The specific coffee order Elias got every morning, the way he'd tap his hard hat 3 times before entering a site, details I'd shared in this safe space, now weaponized. When someone mentioned my absence, Roy expressed concern for his sister-in-law, who was struggling with delusions. The group members exchanged knowing looks. I watched from my car across the street, having arrived late after my shift. Through the window, I could see him holding court, probably spinning tales about my instability. My sanctuary had been compromised. Another piece of my support system, systematically dismantled. The next morning brought a revelation that changed everything. I'd been calling different bank branches, trying to trace Elias's movements before he died. The manager at the branch across town remembered him clearly, not because of the transaction, but because of how nervous he'd seemed. Security footage showed Elias looking over his shoulder repeatedly as he completed the house purchase paperwork. He'd deliberately chosen this branch, 20 miles from home, to avoid Chloe, who worked at our local branch. The manager remembered him asking twice if the transaction would remain confidential. This evidence proved Elias knew Chloe would try to stop him. It showed premeditation, protection, fear of what she might do. But getting the footage required a court order, and my lawyer was suddenly unavailable. Catherine's daughter had gotten the apartment from Chloe, and conflicts of interest were spreading like poison through my legal team. I started piecing together the timeline differently. Elias hadn't just been documenting Chloe's debts in our home computer. He'd been keeping records in his work notebook, the one Chloe had destroyed while I sat in my lawyer's office. Maya confirmed she'd seen Chloe burning pages in the backyard fire pit, feeding them to the flames with mechanical precision. Mom called with an ultimatum. She'd been visiting Chloe, seeing the stable home she'd created, the concerned sister act perfected over months. Now Mom faced a choice: support my delusions and lose access to Chloe, or remain neutral and keep both daughters in her life. Her voice cracked as she chose neutrality. She couldn't lose both of us, she said. She'd already lost Dad, but her neutrality meant no family dinners where I could present evidence, no maternal support in court, no one to vouch for my mental stability from my childhood. Chloe had effectively orphaned me while keeping our mother. Desperation drove me to adopt Chloe's own tactics. If she could manipulate through relationships, so could I. Roy's ex-girlfriend worked at the coffee shop I could no longer visit. I started ordering delivery from there, building rapport with the drivers, learning her schedule. Finally, I accidentally encountered her at the gas station. We talked about the weather while I memorized every detail she let slip about Roy, his gambling debts, his previous attempts to move in with other women, his pattern of targeting grieving families. She didn't know she was giving me ammunition, just venting about an ex who'd left her with thousands in credit card debt. The NA meeting schedule at the community center was public information. I started attending the Al-Anon meetings in the next room, timing my breaks to coincide with Chloe's group letting out. Her sponsor, a kind woman named Dorothy, always bought coffee from the vending machine afterward. Week after week, I positioned myself near that machine, discussing the weather, commenting on the broken button that never dispensed change. Slowly, carefully, I learned Chloe's sobriety date, 2 years after she'd claimed, meaning she'd been using when Grandma was dying, when the will was being written, when she'd promised to help care for our grandmother. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elias's work partner's widow was cleaning out their storage unit and found an old tablet her husband had used for job sites. On it were voice recordings Elias had made, documenting safety concerns, project notes, and his growing fears about Chloe. His voice, preserved digitally, described finding checks missing from our joint account, Chloe's increasingly erratic behavior, her demands for money. He'd been building a case to force her into treatment after our wedding. The recordings were dated, geotagged, indisputable. But Chloe had anticipated this. She created a fake social media profile claiming to be Elias's other fiancé, posting about their secret relationship, how I'd stolen him away. The posts were backdated, the photos carefully cropped from group shots, the narrative convincing enough to make even the voice recording seem suspicious. Was Elias documenting a sister-in-law's addiction, or covering up an affair? My goddaughter's recital was that weekend. I'd promised to attend months ago, before the restraining order made it impossible. The empty seat in the auditorium was photographed, posted online, used as evidence of my negligence and abandonment of family. The custody evaluator for Victoria's case noted my absence, adding it to a growing file about my unreliability. My credit cards maxed out from legal fees while Chloe suddenly had money for renovations. She'd found Elias's emergency fund, cash he'd hidden for our honeymoon, and was using it to transform the house. Every improvement she made increased its value, making it harder for me to afford to buy her out even if I won the legal battle. The confrontation at Elias's favorite restaurant was inevitable. I'd gone there seeking comfort, ordering his usual meal, trying to feel close to him. Chloe and Roy arrived 20 minutes later, warned by someone, always watched, always tracked. The scene that followed traumatized the young waitress who'd served Elias and me our last meal together. Chloe sobbed about my harassment. Roy stood protectively beside her, and I sat frozen as the manager asked me to leave. The other diners recorded everything. Another viral moment of the unstable sister terrorizing the grieving couple. The waitress quit the next day, unable to handle the association with such public drama. Work became untenable. Court dates conflicted with shifts. My exhaustion led to mistakes, and my reputation preceded me with new clients. When I requested unpaid leave, Roy's cousin appeared as my temporary replacement. I overheard her on the phone during her first day, assuring someone that the position would be permanent soon. Living in my car outside the house I owned became my new reality. I parked just beyond the restraining order's boundary, watching Chloe host dinner parties in my grandmother's dining room, seeing shadows move past windows I'd cleaned, lights on in rooms I'd painted. The neighbors documented each night I spent there, adding to their stalking log. Mom visited me once, meeting at Elias's grave. She begged me to let him rest in peace, to stop destroying myself and everyone who loved me. Her words cut deeper than any of Chloe's lies. She genuinely believed I was losing myself myself to grief-fueled delusion that my fight for justice was really an inability to accept reality. The investigation I'd started had consequences I hadn't foreseen. Elias's work friend, who'd shared personnel files showing Elias's concerns about Chloe, was suspended pending an ethics review. His daughter asked why Daddy was home all day, why he seemed so sad. His wife considered separation, unable to handle the financial strain and social embarrassment of association with unstable Hallie. I was destroying innocent lives in my pursuit of truth. Each ally who helped me paid a price. Professional consequences, social isolation, family strain. Chloe didn't have to attack them directly. The mere association with me became toxic. Maya asked the question I'd been avoiding during one of our rare meetings. We sat in her car, windows fogged from the rain, and she looked at me with exhausted eyes. What if I was wrong about everything? What if grief had twisted my memories, made me see conspiracy where there was only concern? I couldn't answer immediately. The doubt crept in like fog, obscuring the clear lines I'd drawn between truth and lies. Every piece of evidence could be interpreted differently. Every fact could support multiple narratives. What if Chloe genuinely believed she was helping? What if I was the architect of my own destruction? To maintain any credibility about my current mental state, I had to publicly admit to past struggles. Yes, I'd had addiction issues in college. Yes, I'd needed therapy after Dad's death. Yes, I'd been on medication for anxiety before I met Elias. Each admission meant to show I was self-aware became another brick in the wall Chloe was building around me. The work notebook revelation hit hardest. Hidden in Elias's old toolbox in my storage unit, I found his project journal. In it, clear as day, were notes about Chloe stealing checks from our account. But underneath, in my own handwriting, were dismissive comments. Work stress. I'd written, talked to him about paranoia. He'd tried to tell me. Months before he died, Elias had seen what Chloe was capable of, and I'd dismissed it as workplace anxiety. The evidence I'd been seeking proved my own blindness. How could I claim to see clearly now when I'd been so wrong before? Chloe's lawyer filed an emergency injunction while my lawyer was in surgery for a scheduled procedure. The junior associate handling my case was overwhelmed, underprepared, and facing Chloe's team alone. By the time my lawyer recovered, temporary orders were in place that I couldn't afford to challenge. The deeper I dug into Chloe's motivations, the more complex they became. She genuinely believed she deserved the inheritance after spending years caring for Grandma while I was living my life in the city. Every holiday I'd missed, every doctor's appointment she'd attended alone, every night she'd spent managing medications, it all added up to a debt she felt I owed. Her resentment was real, decades old, mixed with addiction-fueled entitlement and Roy's manipulation. She saw herself as the forgotten daughter finally claiming her due. In her mind, she wasn't stealing. She was collecting what was rightfully hers. Understanding her perspective made fighting her harder. Enemies were easier when they were purely evil. But Chloe was damaged, sick, convinced of her own righteousness. Every attack on me was, in her mind, self-defense against the sister who'd abandoned family and now wanted to steal everything. I had to betray Elias's last wish to achieve any justice. He'd wanted me to protect Chloe, to get her help, to keep her safe despite everything. But protecting myself meant exposing her completely, ensuring she'd face consequences that would destroy any chance of recovery. I was breaking my promise to the man who died trying to protect us both. The compassionate person I'd been died slowly, replaced by someone who could manipulate, scheme, and use people's weaknesses against them. I befriended Roy's daughter's teacher to gain information. I used Victoria's custody battle as leverage. I became everything I'd once hated, survival requiring transformation. Evidence finally came from the NA sponsor's daughter, who'd noticed discrepancies in Chloe's stories during meetings. She volunteered information about Chloe claiming different sobriety dates to different people, about Roy attending as her support, while dealing substances in the parking lot. Small victories that felt hollow when weighed against what I'd become to achieve them. A minor legal victory, the judge agreed to review the deed, coincided with seeing Chloe at Elias's grave. She was sobbing, clutching the same photo of him I kept in my car. For a moment, she was just my little sister, broken by loss and addiction, grieving the only man who'd ever tried to help us both. The victory turned to ash in my mouth. Chloe's counterclaim of elder abuse regarding Grandma gained traction when she produced witnesses, neighbors who'd seen me leave for work while Chloe stayed home, friends who remembered Chloe managing Grandma's care alone. The truth was more complex, but complexity didn't play well in court. Everything hinged on Roy's ex-girlfriend's willingness to testify about his past schemes, but she had a daughter, a job, a life to protect. Coming forward meant risking Roy's retaliation, Chloe's connections, the town's judgment. I was asking her to sacrifice her peace for my war. The text from Roy's daughter arrived while I sat in my car, reviewing legal documents. "Why are you being mean to Daddy?" it read. She was 8, innocent, loving the father who read her bedtime stories and fixed her bike. I'd tutored her in math, helped with her science fair project. Now I was the villain trying to destroy her family. Elias's construction crew split down the middle. Old-timers who remembered his concerns about Chloe supported me quietly, slipping me cash for legal fees, offering testimony about his fears. But younger workers needed Roy for employment, choosing survival over truth. The job site became a battlefield of loyalties. The legal system's different standards became clear during depositions. Proving fraud required clear and convincing evidence, a high bar that demanded extensive documentation. But involuntary commitment only needed reasonable concern, a few photos, some testimony about erratic behavior, worried family members. Chloe was playing a game where the rules favored her at every turn. I called in Elias's union connections, men who owed him favors, who'd promised to look after his widow. They came through partially, testimony about his concerns, confirmation of timeline details, but none would risk full involvement in what they saw as family drama. Union politics couldn't afford the controversy. The revelation that shattered my remaining innocence came from the union rep himself. Elias had known Chloe was using again 6 months before he died. He'd documented everything, planning to force her into treatment after our wedding, but he'd stayed quiet to protect me from worry, to give me a perfect wedding day. He'd died carrying that burden alone, called by overtime work he'd taken to pay for both a wedding and Chloe's anticipated treatment costs. His protection had been complete, sacrificial, and ultimately fatal. I was living out the plan he'd died trying to execute. The evidence in his toolbox was damning. Photos of Chloe high at family dinners, receipts for money given for groceries that matched dates at liquor stores, a timeline of escalating chaos. But it also showed Elias's terror about what she might do to me if confronted. His fear had been prophetic. Justice meant accepting hard truths. Elias had chosen protecting me over saving himself. He'd worked himself to death rather than risk the confrontation that was now destroying everything. Every victory in court felt like a betrayal of his sacrifice. Committing to finish what Elias started meant embracing the full weight of his plan. Treatment for Chloe, protection for me, preservation of family where possible. But his death had corrupted the timeline, turned a careful intervention into a desperate war. Chloe's overconfidence finally created an opening. During a therapy session she thought was confidential, she admitted knowing about the house ownership for months. She'd been planning her moves, waiting for me to be vulnerable enough to strike. But therapy recordings could be subpoenaed with proper cause, and her therapist was legally required to provide them. The recording was devastating. Chloe's voice, clear and calculating, describing how she'd manipulated my grief, used Roy to intimidate me, created evidence of instability. She laughed about the restraining order, called me pathetic for trusting her. Even her therapist sounded shocked, but I felt no satisfaction presenting this evidence. Watching Chloe realize she'd been trapped by her own words, seeing her confidence crumble, brought only exhaustion. We'd both become people Elias wouldn't recognize, twisted by grief and greed into weapons aimed at each other. The pattern of financial elder abuse emerged through careful documentation. Bank records showed Chloe draining grandma's accounts while I was at work, forging signatures on checks, selling jewelry for substance money. The prosecutor called it one of the clearest cases he'd seen, but clear cases still required trials, evidence, public humiliation of a family already shattered. Both sides prepared for the final hearing with the grim determination of soldiers heading to war. Neither of us could emerge unscathed. The best outcome would still leave us broken, family bonds severed, community divided, but backing down meant accepting defeat, and we'd both gone too far to stop. The mediation room would be our battlefield, with Elias's construction crew supporting me and Chloe's NA group behind her. Two sisters who'd once shared everything now facing each other across a conference table, armed with evidence of each other's destruction. The mediator noted the palpable tension, the way even the air seemed to crackle with barely contained violence. The union rep's testimony arrived through his lawyer the morning of the hearing. He documented every conversation with Elias about Chloe's escalating behavior, every request for overtime that mentioned treatment costs. The paperwork painted a picture of a man desperately trying to save both the women he loved, working himself into an early grave rather than force a confrontation. I sat in my motel room, reading through pages that showed Elias had been planning an intervention for the week after our honeymoon. He'd already contacted treatment facilities, arranged for time off work, even written letters to both Chloe and me explaining his actions. The construction accident had derailed everything, leaving me to fight a war he'd been preparing for in secret. The mediation began at 9 sharp. I arrived early, watching Chloe's supporters file in, her NA group, neighbors from the grief dinner, even the pharmacist who'd witnessed our confrontation. They genuinely believed they were supporting a woman trying to help her mentally ill sister. The narrative Chloe had crafted was airtight from their perspective. My side was smaller but solid. 3 of Elias's crew members, the bank manager who'd finally agreed to testify about the secret transaction, Maya who'd documented the paper shredding, and surprisingly, Dorothy from Al-Anon who'd pieced together Chloe's lies about her sobriety timeline. The mediator laid out ground rules while I studied Chloe across the table. She'd lost weight too, her hands shaking slightly as she arranged her documents. For all her manipulation, the stress was eating at her. Roy sat beside her, his jaw clenched, occasionally shooting glances at his ex-girlfriend who'd agreed to testify. Evidence presentation began with a deed. My lawyer walked through the documentation methodically. The purchase agreement, the bank records, the notarized signatures. Chloe's lawyer countered with the lease I'd signed, the rent payments, the restraining order, each side building their case like lawyers stacking bricks. The security footage from the bank branch changed the room's energy. Watching Elias look over his shoulder, seeing his nervous fidgeting as he signed papers, hearing the bank manager testify about his specific request for confidentiality from Chloe, it painted a picture of premeditation that was hard to ignore. Chloe's therapy recording was played next. Her voice filled the room, casual and calculating as she described waiting for me to be vulnerable enough to strike. The mediator's expression shifted as Chloe laughed about the restraining order, called me pathetic for trusting family. Several of her supporters exchanged uncomfortable glances. Roy's ex-girlfriend testified about his pattern of targeting grieving families. She'd brought documentation, 3 other women he'd moved in with after their husbands died, each time draining their finances before moving on. Her voice stayed steady as she described finding her credit cards maxed out, her grandmother's jewelry pawned, her daughter asking why they had to move to a smaller apartment. The financial forensics were damning. Bank records showed systematic draining of grandma's accounts, signatures that didn't match, checks written while I was documented as being at work. The prosecutor had already filed elder abuse charges based on this evidence, but seeing it laid out chronologically made the pattern undeniable. Chloe's counterclaim fell apart under scrutiny. Yes, she'd been present for grandma's care, but records showed I'd paid for the home health aid, the medications, the medical equipment. Every receipt she claimed as proof of caregiving traced back to my credit cards or bank account. Her narrative of the forgotten daughter crumbled against financial reality. The break came when Dorothy testified about Chloe's actual sobriety date. Meeting records, sign-in sheets, even photos from events proved Chloe had been using during grandma's final months. The woman who claimed she'd sacrificed everything to provide care had been high during the will signing, the funeral planning, the estate settlement. Chloe's composure finally cracked. She stood abruptly, knocking over her water glass, accusing everyone of conspiring against her. Roy tried to calm her, but she shoved him away, screaming about how I'd stolen everything. Elias, the house, Mom's love, even her sobriety story. The mediator called a recess. I stepped outside, needing air, and found Mom in the hallway. She'd been watching through the small window, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the full scope of what had happened. We didn't speak, but she squeezed my hand before returning to her seat. When we reconvened, Chloe's lawyer proposed a settlement. She'd drop all claims to the house, repay the fraudulent rent, submit to mandatory treatment. In exchange, I'd drop the criminal charges, allow supervised contact after 6 months of verified sobriety, and split Elias's life insurance as his fake letter had suggested. I thought about Elias, about his plan to force treatment while preserving family bonds. This wasn't how he'd wanted it to happen, but the end result aligned with his goals. Chloe would get help, I'd get my home back. Maybe eventually, we could rebuild something from the ashes. The agreement took 3 hours to finalize, every detail scrutinized, every contingency planned for. Chloe would wear an ankle monitor during house arrest, test, submit to random substance testing, attend mandatory therapy. Roy faced separate fraud charges for his previous schemes, his fate no longer tied to Chloe's. As papers were signed, I watched my sister across the table. She looked smaller somehow, deflated without her manufactured narrative to prop her up. When our eyes met, I saw a flicker of the girl who'd helped me build blanket forts, who'd held my hand at Dad's funeral, who'd been my best friend before addiction rewired her brain. The house felt strange when I finally returned. Chloe and Roy had left that morning, supervised by sheriff's deputies. Their belongings were gone, but the changes remained. New paint in the living room, different furniture arrangements, the master bedroom that still smelled faintly of Roy's cologne. Elias's construction crew showed up unannounced the next weekend. They repaired the damage, restored things to how they'd been, even repainted the bedroom sunrise yellow. We worked in companionable silence, their presence saying what words couldn't about loyalty and loss. The neighborhood's reaction was mixed. Some apologized for believing Chloe's lies, others remained suspicious of me. A few simply pretended nothing had happened. The Facebook group discussions shifted to other dramas, though I noticed people were quicker to question narratives now, less eager to take sides without evidence. Work welcomed me back cautiously. Roy's cousin had been let go after her temporary contract ended, the position held for my return. Victoria kept her distance initially, guilty about her pragmatic choice, but eventually we found our rhythm again. Not the same as before, but functional. Mom started visiting weekly, trying to bridge the gap between her daughters. She brought photos from our childhood, recipes from grandma, stories about better times. We'd sit at the kitchen table, sharing memories while avoiding the painful recent past. The criminal trial for elder abuse proceeded without my input. The prosecutor had enough evidence to convict without my testimony, sparing me from facing Chloe in court again. She pled guilty in exchange for house arrest instead of jail time, the judge agreeing that treatment addressed the root cause better than incarceration. Maya and I rebuilt our friendship slowly. She'd been caught in an impossible position, manipulated by Chloe while trying to help me. We met for coffee monthly, relearning how to trust each other, acknowledging that some friendships could survive betrayal if both parties committed to healing. The life insurance money sat untouched for months. Using it felt like accepting Elias's death in a way I wasn't ready for. Eventually, I started a scholarship fund for construction workers' children, something Elias would have supported. The first recipient was Roy's daughter, because Elias would have insisted on breaking cycles, not perpetuating them. Chloe's first letter arrived 6 months into her treatment. Her handwriting was steadier, her words cautious but clear. She didn't apologize. Her therapist had apparently advised against grand gestures, but acknowledged the harm she'd caused. She wrote about understanding addiction's role without using it as an excuse. I didn't respond immediately. Forgiveness wasn't a switch to flip, but a process to navigate. I attended my own therapy, working through grief that had been delayed by survival needs, learning to separate the sister I'd loved from the addict who'd tried to destroy me. The sunrise yellow bedroom became mine again, though sleeping there required time and patience. I'd lie awake some nights, remembering Elias painting those walls, planning our future. Other nights, I slept peacefully, feeling his protection even in absence. A year later, I attended Chloe's 1-year sobriety celebration at her treatment facility. She looked healthier, clearer, more like the sister I remembered. We didn't hug or cry or have a movie moment. We simply sat together, acknowledging that some wounds scarred rather than healed, but scars meant survival. Roy's trial ended with a 5-year sentence for fraud. His pattern of targeting grieving women proved his undoing, multiple victims testifying about lost homes and drained accounts. Chloe watched the news coverage from house arrest, finally understanding how thoroughly she'd been manipulated while doing her own manipulating. The house became a home again gradually. I planted grandma's favorite flowers, restored her garden, created new memories to overlay the painful ones. Neighbors who'd attended Chloe's grief dinner sometimes helped with yard work, their quiet assistance a form of apology. 2 years after the mediation, Chloe and I met for coffee under supervision. We talked about safe topics, the weather, mom's health, anything but the past. It was awkward and stilted, but it was a beginning. Elias had wanted her to get help, and she had. He'd wanted me protected, and I was. The scholarship fund grew beyond my initial investment. Elias's union contributed, his crew organized fundraisers, even some neighbors donated. It became a living memorial, helping kids pursue dreams their parents' dangerous work made possible. I learned to live with complexity. Chloe was both my sister and my betrayer. The neighbors were both complicit and deceived. I was both victim and survivor. Justice wasn't clean or complete, but it was real. The legal system had worked imperfectly, but adequately. 3 years later, I stood in the sunrise yellow bedroom, packing it up. Not because of bad memories, but because I'd met someone who understood that love could exist alongside loss. We'd chosen a new place together, neutral ground for building something untainted by past pain. The house would stay in the family. Mom would move in, downsizing from her larger home, keeping it ready for whichever daughter needed refuge. Chloe was building her own life in a sober living facility, working as a peer counselor, turning her manipulation skills toward helping others recognize their own patterns. The morning I moved out, I found a note Elias had hidden in the closet, tucked behind a loose board. His handwriting, faded but clear. If you're reading this, something went wrong with my plan, but you're strong enough to handle whatever comes. Protect yourself first. Help Chloe if you can. Remember that love isn't always enough, but it's always worth trying. I kept the note, packed it with a few things I couldn't leave behind. The house keys went to Mom, the sunrise yellow room awaiting its next chapter. I drove away without looking back, carrying Elias's protection with me, finally understanding that surviving meant more than just enduring. The war for my life had ended not with conquest, but with compromise. Justice came through treatment rather than punishment. Family bonds bent, but didn't break entirely. I'd learned that protection sometimes meant letting go, that love could coexist with boundaries, that some wars ended with everyone scarred but breathing. Elias's grave marker bore fresh flowers weekly, from me, from Mom, sometimes even from Chloe during supervised visits. We'd all lost him in different ways, grieved different versions of the same man, but his final gift hadn't been just the deed to a house. It had been the proof that someone had seen what was coming and tried to shield me from it. That knowledge made all the difference. Even in death, especially in death, love could protect. Not perfectly, not without pain, but enough to survive what came after. The sunrise yellow walls were just paint, but what they represented, new beginnings, hope despite loss, the possibility of tomorrow that traveled with me wherever I went.